A CEO mocked a waitress for her broken English until she corrected him in flawless French, then German, then Mandarin. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and give us a like. We share these stories because they matter, because dignity matters, and we don't want the algorithm to hide them from you. Now, settle in for a story about language, pride, and the dangerous mistake of judging a book by its accent. The rain had started just after the lunch rush, turning the streets outside La Maison du Monde into ribbons of gray and gold. Inside the restaurant, warmth clung to the air. Garlic, rosemary, something sweet baking in the back. It was the kind of place that didn't try too hard. Mismatched chairs, wine bottles repurposed as candle holders, walls covered in faded postcards from every corner of the earth. Sofia Kovac moved between tables like water finding its path. 28 years old, with dark eyes that held too much and said too little. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, a few rebellious strands framing her face. She wore the standard black uniform, but somehow it looked different on her, dignified, almost regal, despite the coffee stain on her apron from the morning shift. She'd been in America for 3 years now. 3 years of smiling through mispronunciations of her name. 3 years of pretending not to notice when customers spoke slower and louder, as if volume could bridge the gap her accent created. 3 years of being invisible in a language that wasn't hers, in a country that promised everything and delivered in fine print. The restaurant belonged to her uncle, Dmitri, who'd given her a job when she'd arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a story she didn't like to tell. He was in the kitchen now, shouting good-naturedly at the line cooks in a blend of Russian and broken English that made the younger staff laugh. This place was Sofia's refuge, her purgatory, her holding pattern while she figured out what came next, if anything came next. She approached table 7, where an elderly couple sat sharing a dessert. The woman's hands shook slightly as she lifted her spoon. Sofia had noticed this on their last 3 visits. "Is good, the tiramisu?" Sofia asked, her accent softening the consonants, turning the question into something almost musical. "Wonderful, dear," the woman said, her eyes crinkling. "You remembered we like extra espresso." "Of course." Sofia smiled, and for a moment the weight lifted. These small kindnesses, they were the scaffolding holding her together, remembering orders, noticing preferences, making people feel seen. It was more than she'd gotten in return lately. She cleared their plates, her mind already calculating. $600 to wire home this month. Her sister Marta needed new textbooks. Her brother Luca's medication couldn't wait. The scholarship money she'd turned down haunted her on nights when sleep wouldn't come. Full ride to the Sorbonne, language studies, a future that glittered like the city lights she could see from her shared apartment in Queens. But family came first. Family always came first. And when her mother died and the bills came like a flood, Sofia had made her choice. She didn't regret it, not exactly. But some nights, when she heard French music playing or saw someone reading in German on the subway, something in her chest would crack open just a little. A door she'd closed, but never locked. The restaurant hummed around her. Table 3 needed water. Table 9 was ready for their check. The lunch crowd was thinning, and Sofia allowed herself to breathe, to think about the evening shift, about whether she'd have time to stop by the library before it closed. She loved the library, the one place where language was everywhere and nowhere, where she could read in 7 different tongues and no one cared about her accent because the words stayed silent on the page. The door chimed. A gust of wind. Sophia glanced up, and that's when he walked in. She didn't know his name yet. Didn't know that he'd just closed a $60 million deal or that he'd made 3 assistants cry that week. Didn't know that Forbes had called him the most ruthless mind in Silicon Valley, or that his company was about to go public at a valuation that would make him a billionaire before his 36th birthday. All she saw was the impatience in his stride, the way he checked his phone before he'd even found a table, the expensive watch that caught the light like a warning. Sophia grabbed a menu and approached. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to La Maison du... Just water. Table for 4. They'll be here in 10 minutes. He didn't look up. "Of course. This way, please." She led him to a corner booth, the best table in the house, usually reserved for regulars. But the man had that energy, the kind that took what it wanted and assumed the world would rearrange itself accordingly. As she set down the menu, their eyes met for just a second. His were gray, cold, assessing. Hers were tired, but steady. He looked away first. Sophia walked back to the service station, her heart beating just slightly faster than normal. She couldn't say why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the temperature in the room had dropped when he entered. Or maybe it was the look on his face, the one that said he'd already decided who she was before she'd even spoken. His name was Julian Blackwood, though Sophia wouldn't learn this for another 7 minutes. He sat in the corner booth with the posture of someone who'd never had to make himself smaller, legs crossed, shoulders back. Phone face up on the table, screen lit with notifications he ignored with the confidence of a man who knew people would wait. Julian was 35 and looked 40, in the way success ages people from the inside out. Sharp jaw, dark hair with premature silver threading through the temples. A face that belonged on magazine covers and in boardrooms where fortunes changed hands before lunch. He'd built his company, Blackpoint Analytics, from a dorm room idea into an empire. Predictive algorithms, market forecasting, the kind of technology that could tell you what people would buy before they knew they wanted it. Wall Street loved him. Competitors feared him. His mother still called every Sunday and asked when he'd settle down. Today had been good. The deal with the German investors was practically sealed. His CFO had warned him about the venue change. Apparently their usual spot had a kitchen fire, but Julian didn't mind slumming it occasionally. Made him seem relatable, human, the kind of CEO who could eat at a hole in the wall and still command respect. Besides, it was only lunch. Sophia returned with water, setting down glasses with practiced precision. She'd tied her apron tighter, straightened her posture. She always did this with the difficult tables, made herself smaller, more efficient, less target. "Your guests, they will have menu too?" she asked. Julian glanced up, already irritated. "Obviously, it's lunch. People eat at lunch." "Yes, of course." Her accent curled around the words, making them soft where his were sharp. "I bring more menu. Menus, plural." He said it slowly, deliberately. "You bring more menus." The table beside them went quiet. One of the regulars, an art teacher named Patricia, stopped mid-conversation and stared. Sophia felt heat crawl up her neck, but her face remained calm. "Yes, more menus. I will bring." "Try saying it in proper English." Julian leaned back, a smile playing at his lips. Not cruel exactly, but not kind either. The smile of someone who thought he was being helpful. You're in America now, sweetheart. Might want to work on that. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sophia's hand tightened around her order pad, her knuckles going white for just a second. Then she breathed, released, and nodded. Of course, sir. I apologize. She walked away with her head high, her steps measured. Behind her, she heard Julian say something to his phone. Probably already forgotten he just humiliated someone. In the kitchen, Dmitri was plating salmon. He looked up as Sophia entered, saw something in her face. You okay, Sofichka? Fine, uncle. She forced brightness into her voice. Just Americans being American. He give you trouble, I throw him out. No need. She grabbed 4 menus from the stack. He's paying customer, that's all he is. But her hands were shaking slightly. Not from anger, she'd learned to swallow that years ago. From something deeper. The old wound that never quite healed. The one that opened every time someone looked at her and saw only what she couldn't do. Never what she could. Back in the restaurant, Julian's guests had arrived. 2 men and 1 woman, all expensively dressed, all speaking rapid French as they settled into the booth. Sophia recognized the rhythm immediately. Parisian French, the kind spoken by people who'd learned it in schools with Latin mottos and ancient libraries. She approached with the menus, her face a mask of professional courtesy. Good afternoon, she said, her accent carefully neutral. I am Sophia. I will be your server today. The woman, elegant in her 50s with a Hermès scarf knotted at her throat, smiled warmly. Bonjour, Sophia. C'est charmant ici. Hello, Sophia. It's charming here. Julian jumped in before Sophia could respond. She doesn't, English only here, I'm afraid. But thank you, Madame Beaumont. And may I introduce Claude Marchand and Philippe Toussaint. They're flying back to Paris tonight, so let's make this count. Handshakes all around. Julian was in performance mode now. Charm dialed up, voice modulated for maximum impact. He'd studied these investors for weeks. Knew Philippe collected vintage motorcycles. Knew Claude had 2 daughters at Oxford. Knew Madame Beaumont had turned down 3 other companies before agreeing to this meeting. This deal would make Black Point international, real international. Not just satellites and subsidiaries, but legitimacy. Old money meeting new tech. He could taste the Forbes headline already. Now, Julian said, opening his menu with a flourish, what looks good? I'm told their coco vin is exceptional. Le coco vin, Claude corrected gently. With the article, it matters in French. Right, Julian laughed, waving it off. My French is terrible. 4 years of high school, and all I remember is où est la bibliothèque? Where is the library? Madame Beaumont raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you should have paid more attention, Monsieur Blackwood. Language is not just vocabulary. It is respect. The temperature at the table shifted. Julian felt it but couldn't quite identify the source. Of course, he said smoothly. Which is why I'm grateful for technology. We have translation software that... Translation software? Philippe interrupted, his accent thick with disdain. This is how you plan to run French operations? Through Google? I didn't mean... We were told Black Point valued cultural integration. Madame Beaumont's tone was ice wrapped in silk. That you understood the European market requires more than algorithms. Julian's jaw tightened. The deal was slipping. He could feel it sliding through his fingers like water. He opened his mouth to salvage it, to say something brilliant and reassuring. And that's when Sophia stepped forward. Pardonnez-moi, Sophia said quietly. Excuse me. Foreheads turned. Julian's eyes widened. Sophia stood at the edge of the table, order pad in hand, her posture relaxed. When she spoke again, it was in French, fluid, effortless, with an accent that carried traces of Eastern Europe but landed firmly in linguistic sophistication. Si vous préférez commander en français, je peux vous aider. Le coq au vin est effectivement excellent aujourd'hui. Le chef utilise un vin de Bourgogne et laisse mijoter pendant 3 heures. Je le recommande vivement. If you'd prefer to order in French, I can help you. The coq au vin is indeed excellent today. The chef uses a Burgundy wine and lets it simmer for 3 hours. I highly recommend it. Silence. Madame Beaumont's face transformed. Vous parlez français? You speak French? Oui, madame. J'ai étudié à Sciences Po avant de... Sophia paused, then continued smoothly. Avant de venir ici. Yes, madame. I studied at Sciences Po before coming here. Sciences Po. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't detonated yet. One of France's most prestigious political science schools, where presidents and diplomats were made. Philippe leaned forward. Vraiment? Quelle année? Really, what year? 2019 à 2020. Programme de langues et relations internationales. 2019 to 2020. Languages and International Relations Program. Claude's eyes lit up. Alors, vous parlez aussi l'allemand? Nous avons des partenaires à Berlin. So you also speak German? We have partners in Berlin. Sophia nodded. Ja, natürlich. Ich spreche fließend Deutsch. Ich habe 2 Jahre in München verbracht während meines Studiums. Yes, of course. I speak fluent German. I spent 2 years in Munich during my studies. The French investors were staring at her now, really seeing her for the first time. Not the waitress with the uncertain English. The educated, multilingual woman who'd probably read books they'd only heard of. Julian felt something strange crawling up his spine. Was it embarrassment? Surely not. He didn't get embarrassed. He was Julian Blackwood. He'd pitched to billionaires in hoodies and senators in suits. He'd been on the cover of Time. But right now, he felt very, very small. How many languages? Madame Beaumont asked in English, her voice soft with something like wonder. Sophia met her gaze. There was no pride in her eyes. No smugness, just calm, quiet truth. 7, she said simply. English, French, German, Spanish, Mandarin, Russian, and Croatian. Croatian is my mother tongue. Mandarin. Philippe switched immediately. 你真的说中文吗? Do you really speak Chinese? 是的，我在北京学习了1年，在上海工作了6个月. Yes, I studied in Beijing for a year and worked in Shanghai for 6 months. Sophia's Mandarin was precise, tonal, beautiful. The 3 French investors burst into simultaneous speech, excited French overlapping with impressed German. Philippe testing her with business Mandarin phrases she answered without hesitation. They'd forgotten Julian entirely. Madame Beaumont was laughing now, asking about Sophia's thesis at Sciences Po. Claude wanted to know her opinion on EU language policy. Philippe was scribbling something in his notebook. And Julian Blackwood sat there, his $60 million deal happening around him instead of with him, watching a waitress he'd mocked 15 minutes ago conduct a multilingual negotiation with more grace than he'd managed in 5 years of business school. She caught his eye for just a second. Her expression was unreadable, not triumphant, not angry, just aware. She saw him now as clearly as he'd failed to see her. Then she turned back to the investors, and Julian heard her say in perfect French, "Now, shall we discuss the menu, or would you prefer to continue this conversation in the language that makes you most comfortable?" Madame Beaumont reached out and touched Sophia's hand. "Ma chère, what are you doing serving tables?" Sophia's smile was small, sad, true. "Making a living, Madame Dame, like everyone else." The question hung in the air, unanswered and enormous. Julian felt it press against his chest. The weight of what he didn't know, couldn't guess, hadn't bothered to imagine about the woman he'd dismissed as less than. She walked away to get their orders, her steps quiet on the worn wooden floor. And for the first time in a very long time, Julian Blackwood felt the floor shift beneath his expensive shoes. This wasn't over. It had barely begun, but the power in the room had changed hands, and everyone knew it. Julian didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. Sophia told herself she didn't care, told herself that men like him, men who wore arrogance like cologne, were forgettable. She'd met 1,000 Julian Blackwoods in her old life. The diplomats who only spoke to interpreters when they needed something. The politicians who thanked her in English after she'd saved their speeches in 5 languages. People who saw her as a tool, not a person. She was used to it. But on Thursday evening, as the dinner rush was winding down and Sophia was rolling silverware in paper napkins, the door chimed. She looked up out of habit. Julian stood in the entrance, looking oddly out of place. No phone in his hand this time. No impatient energy. He wore jeans, expensive ones, but still, and a sweater that made him look almost human. Their eyes met across the restaurant. Sophia's hands stilled on the silverware. Then she looked down and continued rolling. He approached slowly, like someone walking toward a fire they weren't sure they should touch. When he reached her station by the window, he cleared his throat. "Is this a bad time?" "I am working," Sophia said without looking up. "So yes." "Right. Of course." He shifted his weight. "I just wanted to... Look, could we talk? Just for a minute?" Sophia placed the rolled silverware in the bin, then finally met his gaze. Her expression was neutral, professional, the same face she'd worn when he'd mocked her English. "You want to order dinner? I can help. You want to talk? I am not therapist." Something like a wince crossed his face. "I deserve that." "You deserve many things, Mr. Blackwood. All of them I cannot say in restaurant with families." Despite himself, Julian almost smiled. Almost. "It's Julian, and I came to apologize. What I said the other day about your English, it was inexcusable, arrogant, wrong." Sophia studied him for a long moment. The rain had started again outside, painting the windows with rivers of light. She could see him reflected there, standing in her world instead of summoning her to his. "Apology accepted," she said finally. "Will that be all?" "Actually, no." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a business card, set it on the table between them like a peace offering. "I have a proposition. I do not need proposition. I have job. Just hear me out, please." The words seemed to cost him something. Next month, Blackpoint is hosting a global tech summit, 700 attendees from 32 countries. We need translators, real ones, not apps. Someone who can handle high-level negotiations, technical jargon, cultural nuances. He paused, then added, "Someone like you." Sophia picked up the card, glanced at it, set it down. "You have translation agencies for this." "I don't want an agency. I want someone brilliant." His voice dropped, became something closer to genuine. "The investors from last week? They closed the deal. $60 million. And you know what they told me? That any company smart enough to employ someone like you was worth trusting." "They said this?" "Madame Beaumont called you un perle rare, a rare pearl. She asked if you were on our executive team. I had to admit I didn't even know your last name." The shame in his voice was real. Sophia heard it, felt it land somewhere in her chest. But she'd been disappointed too many times to let that matter. "My name is Kovac," she said quietly. "Sophia Kovac. And I appreciate offer, but no thank you." Julian blinked. "Just like that? No negotiation?" "I'm offering triple your current salary for 3 weeks' work." "I do not need your money or your guilt, Mr. Blackwood." "Julian, and this isn't guilt. This is—" He stopped, searching for words. "This is me recognizing talent. You're wasted here." Something dark flickered across Sophia's face. "Wasted is interesting word. I didn't mean, you think you are first person to discover me?" Sophia's voice remained soft, but there was steel underneath now. "To find the waitress who speaks 7 languages and think, what a story, what an opportunity. Like I am lottery ticket you found on ground?" She stood up, folding her apron with precise movements. Her shift was ending. She could feel it, the old wound opening, the one she'd learned to keep sutured shut. "I was UN language fellow once," she said, the words falling like stones into water. 4 years in Geneva. I interpreted for climate summits, peace negotiations, humanitarian crises. I spoke for people who had no voice, translated hope when there was none." Julian's face had gone still. "Then my mother got sick. Cancer, fast kind. I flew home to Zagreb. I had 2 weeks emergency leave. While I was there, taking care of her, watching her die, someone reported immigration paperwork error. Small error from 3 years before. But enough." Her hand tightened on the apron. UN could not help. Said their hands were tied. Diplomatic immunity does not extend to family emergencies. I had choice. Abandon my mother in her last days or lose my position. I chose her. I chose family. The restaurant hummed around them. Someone laughed at a nearby table. Life continuing, oblivious. "She died on a Tuesday," Sophia continued. "I buried her on Thursday. By Friday, my visa status was in question. My colleagues, people I had worked with for 4 years, stopped returning calls. My position was filled before the funeral flowers wilted." She met his eyes, and Julian saw depth there he'd completely missed. Oceans of grief and resilience and pride that had nothing to do with him. "So when you come here with your business card and your opportunity, all I see is another person who wants to use my story, to point at the waitress and feel good about themselves for noticing. You are not my savior, Mr. Blackwood. You are just another customer." She picked up his card, held it for a moment, then handed it back. "I have rebuilt my life from nothing once already. I do not need you to do it again." She walked toward the kitchen, her steps quiet but absolute. Julian stood there, card in hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not embarrassment this time. Something deeper. Recognition of his own smallness. The understanding that some people's courage makes your accomplishments look like children's games. In the back of the kitchen, hidden behind stacks of plates and prep stations, Sophia pulled her time card from the slot. Her hands were shaking now that no one could see. From her locker, she retrieved her things. A worn paperback, her house keys, and a small book of German poetry, its cover soft with age and handling. Inside the front cover, in faded ink, Für Sophia, die die Welt in Worten sehen kann. M. For Sophia, who can see the world in words. She traced the inscription with one finger, then closed the book and tucked it back into her bag. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. Even when someone finally thinks to knock, Sophia didn't expect to see Julian again. Men like him collected their rejections and moved on, finding easier stories, simpler redemptions. But he came back Friday night, sat at a different table, ordered coffee, and didn't touch it. He came back Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, never pushing, never mentioning the summit or the job offer, just there, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not pity, not curiosity anymore. Something else. It should have annoyed her. Instead, it made her careful. On Wednesday evening, during the lull between dinner services, the trouble started at table 12. An American man in his 60s, red-faced and loud, was berating his server, Ana, a shy 19-year-old from Guatemala. "This isn't what I ordered. Are you deaf? Stupid? Do you even speak English?" Ana was close to tears, apologizing in rapid Spanish, her hands trembling as she tried to clear the plates. Sophia moved before thinking. "Sir, perhaps I can help." "Oh, great. Another one." The man threw his napkin down. "This is America. If you can't speak the language, go back to—" "Your mother is Italian," Sophia said quietly. She'd been watching the table all evening. Noticed the elderly woman who hadn't spoken once, who'd ordered in careful, accented English, who'd seemed to shrink with every word her son spoke. The man stopped mid-rant. "What?" Sophia turned to the elderly woman, switched to gentle Italian. "Signora, il suo piatto va bene? Le piacerebbe qualcos'altro?" "Madame, is your dish all right? Would you like something else?" The woman's face transformed. "Parli italiano? You speak Italian?" "Sì. Mia nonna era di Napoli. Mi ha insegnato quando ero piccola." "Yes. My grandmother was from Naples. She taught me when I was small." It was a lie, a small one. But it gave the woman something. Connection, recognition, someone who saw her. They spoke for 3 minutes. Sophia learned the woman's name was Francesca, that she'd immigrated 62 years ago, and her son had forbidden her from speaking Italian at home because it embarrassed him, that she missed Naples like an amputated limb. When Sophia finally turned back to the son, her voice was still soft, but unmistakable in its power. "Your mother says the food is wonderful. She would like the tiramisu, please. And she would like you to remember that the language you speak was once someone else's foreign tongue. We are all immigrants here." Some of us just have shorter memories. The restaurant had gone quiet. The man's face cycled through rage, shame, and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at his mother, really looked at her, for what might have been the first time in years. "Ma," he said roughly, "I didn't know you. Why didn't you tell me you missed—" "You never asked, Carmine." Sophia left them there, the beginning of a conversation that was 40 years overdue. At his table by the window, Julian had watched the entire exchange. When Sophia passed, he stood up. That was remarkable. That was human decency. Sophia didn't slow down. "Can I walk you home tonight?" "It's late." "I am capable of walking myself." "I know." His voice stopped her. "I've been watching you. You're capable of everything. I'd like the company. Mine, I mean. I'd like to walk next to someone who makes me want to be better." Sophia turned, studied his face. The careful vulnerability there. The way he held himself like someone learning a language they'd thought they'd never need. "One walk," she said finally, "but no more job offers." "Deal." They left through the back door into an alley that smelled like rain and bread from the bakery next door. The city stretched around them, all neon and noise and nocturnal energy. They walked in silence for 3 blocks before Julian spoke. "My father died when I was 26, he said abruptly. Heart attack in his office. Classic overwork story. I was in California, building the company. Too busy to visit, too important to slow down." Sophia listened, said nothing. "At the funeral, people kept telling me how proud he must have been. My success, my vision. But the truth is, I have no idea that if he was proud. We never talked about anything real, just quarterly reports and market share. I thought there'd be time later. There wasn't." His voice cracked slightly. "I built an empire trying to prove something to a ghost, and I became exactly like him. Too busy. Too important, not seeing people, just their utility." They stopped at a crosswalk. The light turned green, but neither moved. "You saw me," Julian continued, "really saw me, and you found me wanting. You were right to. I've been so small, Sophia, so determined to be the biggest thing in every room that I forgot rooms are full of people with entire universes inside them." Sophia looked at him then, at the way the streetlight caught the silver in his hair, the exhaustion that lived behind his eyes, the human being emerging from underneath the CEO. "Your father," she said softly. "Did he know you loved him?" Julian stopped. "I don't know." "Then maybe that is what you need to solve. Not with me, not with job offers or apologies, but with yourself. The person you want to be when no one is watching." She stepped off the curb as the light was changing. Julian followed, something shifting in his chest. The first crack in armor he'd been building since he was old enough to understand that weakness was dangerous. "People like you," Sophia said, not looking at him, "always lose interest once the story fades. Once the waitress goes back to being just a waitress. Once the moment passes." "And if I promised not to?" "Then you would be lying, to me or to yourself. Either way, it ends the same." They reached her building, a modest walk-up in Queens, laundry hanging from fire escapes, music drifting from open windows. 1,000 lives stacked on top of each other, invisible to people like Julian. Until now. "Thank you," she said, "for the walk, for the honesty. But this, whatever this is, it cannot happen." "Why not?" "Because you live in a world where mistakes are fixed with money. I live in a world where one mistake means starting over. We are not same, Julian. We will never be same." She went inside before he could respond. And Julian stood on the sidewalk, watching her window light up 4 floors above, understanding for the first time what it meant to want something he couldn't acquire. Someone, not something. The difference was everything. The tech summit was 3 weeks away when Clara Renner walked into Julian's office. She was 42, impeccably dressed, with blonde hair pulled back in a style that screamed European efficiency. Her resume was perfect. International law degree from Oxford. 10 years at the EU Commission. Fluent in 6 languages. Exactly what Blackpoint needed for their expansion. Julian hired her after 2 interviews. Made her VP of International Affairs with a salary that would make most people weep. He thought he'd made a brilliant move. He had no idea what he'd just invited in. Clara's first week was textbook executive onboarding, meeting department heads, reviewing expansion strategies, attending dinners with potential partners. On Friday afternoon, she suggested lunch at a place she'd heard about. Authentic international cuisine, she said. I like to support immigrant-owned businesses. Julian should have wondered how she'd found it, should have questioned the timing. He didn't. La Maison du Monde was crowded when they arrived. Dimitri was at the host stand, arguing good-naturedly with a food critic who wanted to review them anonymously. Mr. Blackwood, Dimitri's face lit up. Welcome back. Your usual table? If it's available, this is Clara Renner, our new VP. Pleasure. Sophia, your favorite customer is here. Julian felt something warm in his chest at that. His favorite customer. As if he'd become more than just another suit. Sophia emerged from the kitchen carrying 3 plates, balanced with practiced ease. She was laughing at something one of the line cooks had said. Her hair was down today, falling in waves around her shoulders. She looked younger, lighter. Then she saw Clara. Everything in her went still. The plates trembled for just a second before she steadied them. Her face became a mask, the same professional neutrality she'd worn that first day. But Julian had learned to read her now, saw the fear flicker across her features before she buried it. Clara smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Sophia Kovac. My God, I never thought I'd see you again. Sophia set down the plates at a nearby table, murmured something apologetic, then turned. Her voice when she spoke was carefully empty. Clara, what a surprise. You two know each other? Julian looked between them, sensing tension he couldn't identify. Oh, we go way back. Clara's tone was warm honey with poison underneath. Sophia and I were at Sciences Po together. We were quite close until, well, perhaps that's a story for another time. Perhaps never, Sophia said quietly. A customer called for her. Sophia excused herself, moving away with what looked like relief. Julian and Clara sat at the corner booth, the same one where this had all started. I had no idea you knew her, Julian said, watching Sophia across the restaurant. She was taking an order, her hands moving gracefully, her face giving nothing away. Knew her? I was her mentor. Clara opened her menu, not really looking at it. Brilliant girl, truly gifted linguist. Such a shame what happened. What did happen? Clara was quiet for a moment, as if weighing her words. You have to understand, Julian, these programs, the fellowships, the diplomatic positions, they require absolute integrity, complete honesty in all applications and documentation. Something cold began crawling up Julian's spine. Sophia's credentials were always impeccable on paper, Clara continued, but there were questions, discrepancies in her immigration status. Some suggested she'd falsified documents, to maintain her position when her visa situation became complicated. That's not true. Julian said it before thinking, before even knowing if it was true. But the certainty in his chest was absolute. I'm not saying it is. I'm simply telling you what the investigation found. Clara's eyes met his. She resigned before they could conclude the inquiry. Very sudden, very convenient. And now here she is, working under the table in a restaurant where no one asked questions. The words landed like grenades. Working under the table, falsified documents. Investigation. Julian thought about Sophia's reluctance to take his offer. Her insistence that she'd rebuilt from nothing. The way she'd described being abandoned by her colleagues. How much of that story was true? "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you mentioned wanting to hire her for the summit, and I'd hate to see Black Point's reputation compromised by association with someone who has, shall we say, a complicated legal history." Clara closed her menu. "But it's your decision, of course. I just thought you should know who you were dealing with." Sophia appeared at their table, order pad ready. Her eyes met Julian's for just a second. She saw something there. Doubt maybe, or suspicion. And he watched her shut down completely. "What can I get for you today?" Professional, distant, the walls back up. Julian opened his mouth. Closed it, looked at Clara, then back at Sophia. "Actually," Clara said smoothly, "I've lost my appetite. Julian, shall we go somewhere else?" It was a test. Julian knew it was a test. He stood up. "Sophia, I'm sorry. We'll come back another time." He didn't see her face as they left. Didn't see the way she nodded, turned away, disappeared into the kitchen where Dmitri found her 15 minutes later, sitting on a milk crate, holding that book of German poetry like a lifeline. Back at the office, Julian sent an email to his assistant. Cancel the translation offer for the summit. Engage with agency services as originally planned. He told himself it was the right decision, the safe decision, that he barely knew her, that Clara's concerns were legitimate, that protection, his company, came first. He told himself a lot of things. None of them felt true. And across the city, in a restaurant that smelled like garlic and rosemary and broken dreams, Sophia Kovacs read the email notification on her phone. The summit invitation, rescinded. She hadn't wanted it anyway. That's what she told herself. But her hands were shaking as she deleted the message. And the poetry book fell open to a page she'd memorized years ago. Trust is porcelain. Once shattered, even the most careful glue shows cracks. She'd trusted him to see her. He'd chosen to look away. The story always ended the same. The threats came quietly at first. Clara appeared at the restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon when the lunch crowd had thinned. She ordered tea, she didn't drink, and waited until Sophia's shift ended. "We should talk," Clara said, her voice carrying the false warmth of old friendship. "About your situation." Sophia sat down because refusing would have been more conspicuous. "I have nothing to say to you." Still stubborn, "I always admired that about you." Clara stirred her tea with precise movements. Though it did make things more difficult when the committee started asking questions about your visa status. You remember, Geneva, 2020. You reported me. It wasn't a question. Sophia had suspected for years, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch. "I raised concerns, legitimate concerns about documentation irregularities. It was my duty." Clara's smile was surgical. "And now you're here, working without proper authorization, I imagine. cash payments. No paper trail. Very resourceful. Very illegal. Sophia's hands clenched under the table. What do you want? Julian Blackwood. You need to stay away from him. He's important to my career trajectory, and I can't have complications from his past. She paused. Charitable impulses. He rescinded the job offer. I have not seen him in 2 weeks. Good. Keep it that way. Because if you don't, I'll make one phone call to immigration services. They're very interested in undocumented workers these days. One call, Sophia. And your siblings back home, how would they manage without your support? The threat hung between them like smoke. You were my friend once, Sophia said quietly. I was your competitor. You were just too naive to see it. Clara stood, dropped a $20 bill on the table. Stay away from Julian. Stay invisible. It's what you do best anyway. She left, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown. Sophia sat there for a long time, staring at the money, blood money, silence money, the price of remaining small. That evening she told Dmitri she was quitting. He argued, pleaded, offered more money, better hours, but Sophia just hugged him and said she needed to disappear for a while. From what? He asked. From myself, she answered. The rain started as she walked home through streets that blurred into watercolor. Manhattan became a dream of lights and shadows, and Sophia moved through it like a ghost haunting her own life. She thought about all the years she'd spent making herself smaller, learning to apologize for her accent, hiding her degrees, pretending ignorance was safety. She'd survived by becoming invisible, and now invisibility was suffocating her. At a crosswalk, she stopped, watched the rain create rivers in the gutters, washing everything toward the drains. Erasure, disappearance, the natural end of things that tried too hard not to be seen. Was this it? Was this what she'd saved her mother for? Worked 7 languages for? Sacrificed Geneva for? A life spent hiding? Her apartment was dark when she arrived. Small studio in Queens, 23 floors up. She could see the city from here. All those windows, all those lives, all that noise that never acknowledged her presence. The mailbox downstairs had been full. Bills mostly. A postcard from Marta showing perfect grades. In a cream-colored envelope with international postage. She opened it standing in her kitchenette, still dripping rain. The letterhead read, Global Education Forum, Keynote Speaker Invitation. Her hands trembled as she read, Dear Ms. Kovacs, your recent viral video speaking multiple languages with grace and dignity has moved thousands. We would be honored if you would keynote our annual forum on the languages of dignity, immigrant voices in global discourse. Your story represents everything we champion. Viral video? Sophia pulled out her phone, searched her name. The video had 3 million views. Someone had filmed the moment at the restaurant, her speaking French, German, Mandarin to the investors. The comments were overwhelming. People sharing their own stories. Immigrant children thanking her for representing them. Linguists praising her fluency. Educators calling her inspiring. She watched herself on that tiny screen. Saw what others saw. Not a waitress. Not someone small. Someone powerful. The letter fell from her hands. She sat on her floor and wept, for the years lost, for the person she'd buried, for the voice she'd silenced in the name of survival. The forum was in 3 days. New York, the Pierre Hotel, 2,000 attendees. She'd have to be visible. Terrifyingly, beautifully visible. Across the city, in a glass tower office, Julian Blackwood was having the worst day of his professional life. It started with an email from Madame Beaumont. Subject line, disappointed. We are reconsidering our partnership. Your treatment of extraordinary staff reflects poorly on Black Point's values. We invested in a company that saw talent everywhere. You demonstrated blindness. Then Philippe sent transaction cancellation paperwork. Then Claude requested a 6-month delay on implementation. $60 million evaporating because he doubted Sophia. Julian called Clara into his office. What exactly did you tell me about Sophia Kovac? The truth, Clara said smoothly. She's legally compromised. I saved you from... Saved me? You cost me the biggest deal of my career. Because you couldn't keep your sentiments separate from business. I told you she was trouble. Julian's jaw tightened. Show me the investigation files. The documentation irregularities you mentioned. That's confidential. Show me. Now. Something flickered across Clara's face. I don't have access to... because they don't exist. A voice from the doorway. Madame Beaumont stood there, imperious in Chanel. May I enter, Monsieur Blackwood? Julian stood. Please. Madame Beaumont walked in like judgment itself. She placed a folder on Julian's desk. After our last meeting, I made inquiries. I know people at Sciences Po, people at the UN, people who remember Sophia Kovac. She opened the folder. Inside, letters of recommendation, commendations, performance reviews that read like love letters to competence. There was never an investigation, Madame Beaumont said. There was jealousy. Ms. Renner here filed false complaints that were dismissed immediately. Sophia left because her mother was dying and her visa extension was delayed. A bureaucratic error, not fraud. She chose family over career. That is integrity, not criminality. Julian looked at Clara, really looked, saw the desperation there, the calculation. You lied to me. I gave you my assessment. You sabotaged her, and you tried to use me to do it again. His voice was ice. You're fired. Security will escort you out. Clara's face went white. You're making a mistake. She's nobody. A waitress. She's everything you'll never be. Julian pressed the intercom. Security to my office. After Clara was removed, screaming about lawsuits and reputation, Madame Beaumont sat across from Julian. You doubted her, she said simply. I did. Why? Julian was quiet for a long moment. Because believing her required believing I could be that wrong about someone, that I could miss something that extraordinary standing right in front of me. And now? Now I've lost the only person who told me the truth. He looked at Madame Beaumont. How do I fix this? She smiled, sad and knowing. You don't fix. You witness. You listen. You become worthy of the truth she already offered you. She stood to leave, then paused. She speaks at the Global Education Forum this Friday, the Pierre Hotel, 8 p.m. I suggest you attend. And this time, Monsieur Blackwood, listen with more than your ambition. After she left, Julian sat in his empty office and understood what Sophia had tried to tell him that night they walked home. Some things couldn't be acquired. They could only be earned. The Pierre Hotel ballroom held 2,000 people and felt like the entire world. Sophia stood backstage, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. She wore a simple navy dress, the nicest thing she owned, and her hair was pulled back the way she used to wear it in Geneva. Professional, Serious, visible. A woman from the forum touched her shoulder. 5 minutes, Miss Kovac. You ready? No. Yes. From her bag, she pulled the German poetry book, read the inscription one more time. For Sophia, die die Welt in Worten sehen kann. For Sophia, who can see the world in words. Marcus had written that. Her professor at Sciences Po. The one who'd believed in her when she could barely believe in herself. He died 3 years ago, but his words lived on, pressed between pages of Rilke and Goethe. She could do this. For him. For Marta and Luca. For every immigrant who'd ever made themselves smaller to survive. For herself. The lights dimmed. Applause filled the ballroom like ocean waves. Sophia walked onto the stage, each step a reclamation of ground she'd surrendered. At the back of the ballroom, hidden in shadow, Julian Blackwood stood with his heart in his throat. He'd almost missed it. Traffic, doubt, fear. But Madame Beaumont's words had haunted him for 3 days. Witness, listen, become worthy. Now Sophia stood in the spotlight, and Julian finally understood what light looked like when it found something worth illuminating. She began in English, her accent present but proud. My name is Sophia Kovac. I am immigrant. I am waitress. I am sister, daughter, and dreamkeeper for family I may never see again. I am 7 languages contained in one body. I am everything you do not notice until you need me. The room went quiet. Tonight, I want to talk about cost of invisibility. About what happens when we make ourselves small enough to fit into spaces that were never designed for us. She switched to Mandarin, fluid and precise. 在北京，我学会了沉默的价值，但沉默和被忽视是不同的。沉默是选择，被忽视是暴力。In Beijing, I learned the value of silence, but silence and being ignored are different. Silence is choice. Being ignored is violence. Then Spanish, warm and rhythmic. Mi madre me dijo antes de morir, tu voz es tu poder. No la entierres con cosas que otros te hicieron creer sobre ti misma. My mother told me before she died, your voice is your power. Don't bury it with things others made you believe about yourself. Back to English. I buried my voice for 3 years. I apologized for my accent. I pretended to understand less than I did. I made myself palatable, digestible, non-threatening. I became ghost in my own story. Her voice grew stronger. But ghosts do not change world. Ghosts do not inspire children. Ghosts do not translate hope. And I am tired of haunting my own life. The audience was transfixed. In the back, Julian felt tears on his face and didn't wipe them away. There is man who once mocked my English, Sophia continued. He thought he was teaching me. Instead, he was revealing his own poverty, not of money, but of imagination. He could not imagine that broken English might house perfect French. That accent might mask brilliance. That quiet might contain entire universes. Julian closed his eyes. I do not tell you this for revenge. I tell you because he learned. And learning is victory. When powerful person finally sees you, really sees you, the world shifts just slightly on its axis. And suddenly, invisible people everywhere become just little bit more visible. She switched between languages then, French, German, Croatian, each one punctuating her message like drumbeat, each one proof that she contained multitudes. We are not your inspiration. We are not your redemption. We are simply human beings who learn to speak world's languages because world would not learn to speak ours. And that, she paused, that is not beautiful struggle. That is survival. Let us name it accurately. The room erupted. Standing ovation that went on for minutes. People weeping. Languages mixing in the applause like symphony. Sophia stood there, spotlight painting her gold, and felt something inside her unbreak. She'd found her voice again. Afterward, the crowd pressed close. Educators wanting her contact, publishers offering book deals, universities extending teaching positions. But Sophia moved through them like water, looking for the exit, needing air, needing to process what had just happened. In the corridor outside, she finally stopped, leaned against the wall, let herself breathe. Sophia. She turned. Julian stood there, his face raw with emotion. "You came," she said. I had to hear." His voice broke. "I'm sorry. For doubting you, for choosing fear over truth, for being exactly the kind of small-minded fool you described on that stage. Julian, you don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything, but I owe you the world." He stepped closer, his eyes red. "I've spent my life building empire of transactions, acquiring, controlling, winning. And then you showed me that some things, the most important things, can't be acquired. They can only be witnessed." Sophia felt her own tears coming. "You hurt me. I know. You believed her instead of me. I know. And I will regret that for the rest of my life." He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. "I wrote you something. It's probably terrible, but I needed to try." She took it, her name on the front in his handwriting. "What is it?" "A beginning," he said, "if you'll allow it. If not, if you walk away now, I'll understand. But I needed you to know that you changed me, fundamentally, forever." Sophia held the envelope like a question she wasn't ready to answer. "Read it later," Julian said, "when you're ready, or never. But know this, I see you now, Sophia Kovacs. All 7 languages, all the brilliance you've been hiding, all the grace you've been spending on people who never deserved it." He turned to leave. "Julian," he stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for finally listening." He nodded, unable to speak, and walked away. Sophia stood in the corridor, envelope in hand, feeling the weight of crossroads. Some doors, once opened, changed everything. She wasn't sure yet if she was ready, but for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid to find out. 6 months later, Sophia stood in a village library in rural Colombia, watching children discover books in their own language for the first time. The Black Point Foundation for Global Literacy had opened 17 libraries in 6 months. This was the 18th. Small building, big windows, shelves filled with stories in Spanish, indigenous languages, English, and French. A place where language was celebration, not barrier. Sophia had designed every aspect of the program, chosen the books, trained the librarians, created multilingual reading programs that honored local languages while teaching global ones. It was everything she dreamed of in Geneva, made real. And Julian had made it possible, not with transactions, with trust, with listening, with stepping back and letting her build something that mattered. He stood beside her now. watching a girl of maybe 9 sound out words in a picture book. His Spanish was improving. Sophia had been teaching him, patiently correcting his pronunciation the way someone had once patiently mocked hers. "She reminds me of you," Julian said quietly. "How so?" "The way she holds the book, like it contains secrets the world tried to keep from her." Sophia smiled. "Books are time machines. They let us be someone else, somewhere else, someone important." "You were always important." "I know that now." They walked outside into golden afternoon light. The village square hummed with life. Children playing, vendors selling fruit, old men arguing about football. Life in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Julian stopped by a flowering tree, its branches heavy with pink blossoms. He looked nervous, which was new for him. Sophia had watched him pitch to heads of state without breaking a sweat, but right now, his hands were shaking. "I wrote you something," he said. "Another letter?" "The same letter. I've been rewriting it for 6 months." He pulled out a small leather journal, worn at the edges from handling. "I wanted to get it right." Sophia's heart began to beat faster. "Julian, let me read it, please. I've been practicing." He opened to a page marked with a pressed flower, jasmine, from the garden at La Maison du Monde. Sophia recognized it immediately. Julian began in English, his voice soft but steady. "Sophia, I am not fluent in language of apology. I am clumsy with words that matter. But you taught me that trying is its own kind of fluency." He switched to French, reading carefully. "Tu m'as montré que la vraie richesse n'est pas ce que l'on possède, mais ce que l'on comprend." You showed me that true wealth is not what we possess, but what we understand. German next, his pronunciation heavily accented but sincere. "Ich war blind, aber du hast mir beigebracht zu sehen. Nicht mit Augen, sondern mit Herz." I was blind, but you taught me to see. Not with eyes, but with heart. Spanish, warming into something beautiful. Cada idioma que hablas es una puerta a un mundo que yo nunca supe que existía. Every language you speak is a door to a world I never knew existed. He stumbled on Mandarin, laughed at himself, tried again. Ni jiao hui le wo, li liang bu, zai yu da sheng shuo hua, zai yu zhen zheng de qing ting. You taught me that power is not in speaking loudly, but in truly listening. Russian was harder, his accent making Sophia smile through gathering tears. Ti moja učitelnica, moja sovest, moja nadezhda na to, kem ja mogu stát. You are my teacher, my conscience, my hope for who I can become. And finally, Croatian, her language, her home, the words he'd learned just for this moment. Volim te, ne zato što si sedam jezika, nego zato što si jedna jedina ti. Hoćeš li se udati za mene? I love you, not because you are 7 languages, but because you are one singular you. Will you marry me? He closed the journal, pulled out a ring, simple gold band with inscription inside. Sophia could just make out the words, "All languages lead to you." She was crying now, properly crying, and Julian was crying too, and the village children had gathered to watch, not understanding the words but recognizing love in any language. "You're Croatian," Sophia said through tears. "Terrible, I know." You said marry in future tense instead of conditional. You asked, "Will you marry me?" like it's happening regardless, not "Would you marry me?" like a question. Julian's face fell. I ruined it. No. Sophia took the ring from his hand, slipped it on her own finger. You made it perfect. Because yes, I will marry you. Not conditional, certain, absolute. She kissed him then, under the pink blossoms, in a village whose name she'd barely learned, surrounded by children who cheered in Spanish because joy needed no translation. When they pulled apart, she was laughing. Line 3 of the German paragraph. You used wrong article. Das Herz, not der Herz. I'll rewrite it. Don't you dare. She pressed her hand to his chest, felt his heart beating fast. I want to keep it exactly as it is. Imperfect. Trying. Yours. They stood there as the sun began to set, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. Around them, the library glowed with light as children discovered stories. Behind them, their whole future waited, imperfect, uncertain, hopeful. Sophia thought about the waitress she'd been 6 months ago. Invisible, afraid, small. And she thought about the woman she was now, director of a foundation, educator, speaker, someone who'd learned that visibility was not vanity. It was power. But more than that, she'd learned that sometimes the greatest fluency isn't in how many languages you speak. It's in understanding someone's silence, the things they can't say, won't say, are afraid to say, and choosing to listen anyway. Julian had learned to listen, and in listening he'd learned to hear. That was the love worth having, the kind that required translation not between languages, but between hearts. As they walked back toward the village square, their hands intertwined, Sophia whispered in Croatian, "Sometimes the longest journeys are measured in languages learned and lessons earned." Julian smiled. I didn't understand that. I know. I'll teach you. How long will it take? Lifetime, she said. Maybe 2. Perfect. I've got the time. And in the golden light of late afternoon, in a village library full of children learning to read the world, 2 people who'd been speaking different languages finally found the same words. I see you. I hear you. I choose you. In any tongue, it meant the same thing. It meant home. Thank you for listening to this letter of hope. To everyone who's ever been underestimated, everyone who's made themselves small to survive, everyone who's buried their brilliance because the world wasn't ready to see it, your story matters. Your voice matters. Your languages, accents, mistakes, and magnificent attempts at being understood all matter. Sometimes the truest fluency isn't in perfect grammar or flawless pronunciation. It's in recognizing the humanity in someone's struggle to be heard. It's in pausing long enough to listen. It's in understanding that every person you meet contains entire universes, and some of those universes speak in languages you've never learned. If this story moved you, share it. Share it with the immigrant working 2 jobs. Share it with the student too afraid to speak in class. Share it with anyone who's ever apologized for their accent, or hidden their intelligence, or pretended to be less than they are. We don't lose these stories to the algorithm. We don't lose each other. Because every voice, in every language, in every corner of the world, deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening. Until next time.